YouTube, TikTok. We're also on X. You can always join us. On YouTube is Mbum Ferdinand. That's you're joining us on YouTube. Then on TikTok, it's History Desk TV. Then on Facebook, it's Ferdinand Mbum on Facebook. You can join us and also make your contribution as regards these issues. So we are making a recap on all we did between Monday and Wednesday. So this is going to be the tradition. This is what we'll always do regularly. After I almost have finished Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, we'll come back to make a recap on everything we talked about. When I mean recap, it's not. It doesn't mean we'll just brush aside. We'll still talk about everything extensively. So on Monday, nationally, you know all we talked about, and you are all aware now what the program, the show is all about. Yes, it's a trend into the politics of our history and the history of our politics, purely current affairs, where we engage ourselves, and learn together. It's a class of current affairs. We have to know our history. We have to know our past so that we'll know how our future would be like. That's very important. Some people have criticized the show on air, saying that with the way Nigeria is now, the show is, the timing is wrong. We shouldn't be saying all these things that happened in the past. But I want to tell you that that's not true. We really have to know where we are coming from. We really know how. We really have to know that. And particularly for growing up kids, we need to allow our kids, our children, to know the basis of our history so that we can appreciate how our tomorrow will be like. So that our kids can really appreciate their today. It's very important. We learn certain things. We'll also, beside what happened nationally, we'll look at international history and current affairs too. So what we'll be discussing, what we'll talk about is the August 27, 1985 military rebellion in Nigeria, where the army chief, Major General Ibrahim Babangida, decided to upstage his commander-in-chief, that is his immediate boss, and became Ibrahim Babangida took over power from the commander-in-chief of the Nigerian Armed Forces and the head of state, Major General Muhammadu Buhari. Then we'll also look at August 1st, 1966, when a 31-year-old Lieutenant Colonel from Army Headquarters in Nigeria, Yakubu Gowon, was made the head of state, even when there were more senior officers. But Northern troops decided to make him head of state. We will talk about that. Then I remember on Tuesday we went into international diplomacy and talked about how the South African 21 political parties in South Africa decided to come together to put an end to the apartheid policy after agreeing to a new constitution in South Africa. And after a few months thereafter, Nelson Mandela became the first black president in South Africa. We'll tell you, we talked about that. Jerry Riddle came on air and we were able to analyze that. We subjected that into some level of analysis. So, but before we go to the Ibrahim Babangida issue, let's tell you some of the things that happened internationally. And also, no, we didn't do that this week, but by next week, we'll look at the Watergate scandal in the United States. In June of 1972, 5 men broke into the Watergate hotel complex in Washington, D.C. And they were caught. And after some journalists decided to go into investigation, and the United States Federal Bureau of Investigation. The President of the United States, Richard Nixon, was involved, and that forced Nixon to tender his resignation. And that paved the way for the meteoric rise of Gerald Ford, who later became the first politician in United States history to become vice president and president without ever being elected. Yes, there's international politics. We'll tell you about that and we'll give you the details by next week. But for now, let's just look at what we have on hand. I'll just give you the story, quick rundown, what happened internationally in the month of September. We'll talk about that. And we'll come back to tell you about the issues as it relates to General Ibrahim Babangida and General Yakubu Gowon. And also we talked about NANS, the National Association of Nigerian Students, NANS, and what is happening to student agitation. You know, student agitation in Nigeria is almost dead. Students don't fight for their rights anymore. I remember in those good old days, where school management decided to hike school fees, students will say, no, this is not the way. We can't pay. Our parents cannot afford this. And management will lay out the students that will come to a round table to negotiate what their future will be like. But these days, what are we seeing? And why we talked about this during the week was because of the death of the president of the National Association of Nigerian Students, Comrade Moses Osakide, who died in an ill-fated car crash on the 1st of September 1999. We'll look at that and we'll reel everything out. And also in September, we looked at international diplomacy and we looked at World War II. Yes, World War II started on the 1st of September 1939, following Nazi Germany's invasion of Poland. And till date, it's on record that World War II remains the most expensive and deadliest conflict in human history. It's over 100 million. To play the case of 11 rusticated union activists, President of the National Association of Nigerian Students, NANS, Comrade Moses Osakede, was killed in an ill-fated car crash on the Anpa Makudi Road. Comrade Osakede was traveling in the official car of NANS, a 504 Pojo station wagon. In the car with Osakede were Livingstone Kwanga, who also died in the accident, and Vincent Agada, who was at the time the president of the student union government at the University of Jos. Others who were passengers in the value of life is in its contribution to humanity. The value of life is in its contribution to humanity. Between the time of his election at the University of Ibadan Convention in December of 1998 to his death in September of 1999, he was an exemplary leader by every possible standard. Comrade Osakide, who assumed office at a time when the leadership of NANS was being lobbied and hijacked by big money bags, and the government strove to lead without any blemish. Unlike what obtains presently when NANS has been turned into a platform for personal aggrandizement, doling out awards to one discredited politician to another, jumping from one government office to another, while student interests are being attacked. Comrade Osakide pursued the interests of students with commitment of service and without any form of distractions. He was always on the road, visiting schools, meeting with various schools' management, always agitating for better welfare conditions for Nigerian students. And it is not only befitting, but also ironic that he should lose his life on one of such numerous trips he undertook in the course of his stewardship. It was a common feature then for Nigerian university vice chancellors to arbitrarily expel student activists without due process or respect for the rule of law. It was during one of such expulsions carried out by the Vice Chancellor of the Federal University of Agriculture in Makurdi, Professor E.O. Gyang, that Comrade Osakide and his comrades were set out to quell when they got involved in the ill-fated car crash. When they set out from Ekpoma, the aim was to get to Makurdi to attend the public sitting of the Presidential Visitation Panel set up by then President Olusegun Obasanjo to look into the various unrest in Nigerian universities and redress all cases of victimization and injustices perpetrated by the vice chancellors of the military era. 11 student activists were earlier rusticated from the university, and the student union government was banned by the vice chancellor. So the affected students did not have any mouthpiece to voice their grievances to the visitation panel. It was therefore very expedient and imperative that NANS should be at the panel to present their case. The affected students had at a Senate meeting of NANS specifically requested that Comrade Osakide be physically present at the panel. The expelled students trusted and believed that Comrade Osakide would not betray them. NANS Senate thereby resolved and mandated that Comrade Moses Osakide should be physically present to make the case of the rusticated students at the panel. Unfortunately, the timing of the panel had coincided with the examination period at the Ambrose Ali University in Ekpoma. Comrade Osakide had to decide on whether to go against the Senate resolution and not go to the panel sitting, or put his academics on the line and head to Makurdi. He eventually decided to jettison his examinations and headed straight for Makurdi to save the students. He said in quotes, "If I miss the exams, I can still write it another time. But if I miss Makurdi, those boys might never have the chance to write an exams, let alone fail it." How philosophical that statement turned out to be. Comrade Moses Osakide missed his exams and he also missed Makurdi. But at least, as a consolation for his soul, those boys did have a chance to write their exams, because the institution's management, learning of the accident, and for fear of a nationwide backlash, automatically reinstated all rusticated students. Though Osakide had to sacrifice his own chance. Comrade Moses Osakide's demise was described by President Olusegun Obasanjo as a national tragedy. He was mourned by a grieved nation. Philip Shaibu from the University of Jos, who not too long ago was the Deputy Governor of Edo State, succeeded Comrade Moses Osakide as NANS president. Yes, you can make your comments, particularly those of you following us on Facebook Live, our social media platforms, TikTok. Please make your comments. Let's engage each other. It's very important. Then on YouTube, you can also make your comments and share. On YouTube, you can also share this video to others, reach as much people as possible. You can also subscribe on our YouTube page, and make sure that you get yourself heavily involved in what we are doing. Education is key, and history is very important. Your own idea of current affairs might be better than what we have on ground, so you can always make sure that you are part of the juggling. Well, that is it. From national perspective, I will tell you. Then let's go to international diplomacy, international politics. In 2019, one of Africa's most controversial leaders and one of the longest serving world leaders in modern history, Robert Mugabe, died of cancer in a hospital in Singapore at the age of 95. Mugabe, who served as leader of Zimbabwe from 1980, was forcefully removed from office 2 years prior to his demise. In November of 2018, the Zimbabwe's incumbent president, Emerson Mnangagwa, said Mugabe was unable to walk and had been receiving treatment in Singapore for the previous 2 months. He was hospitalized in Singapore in April of 2019, making the last of several trips to the country for medical treatment, as he had done late in his presidency and following his resignation. He died at Glens Gills Hospital in Singapore at about 10:40 a.m. Singapore Standard Time, according to a senior Zimbabwean diplomat. Although the cause of death was not officially disclosed, his successor, Emerson Mnangagwa, told ZANU-PF supporters in New York City that Mugabe had advanced cancer and his chemotherapy treatment had ceased to be effective. On 11 September 2019, his body was flown back to the Harare airport in Zimbabwe, where 1,000 had gathered to wait for the body and listen to a speech from President Mnangagwa. Mugabe's body was then driven to the family residence in Borodali for a private week, attended by his friends and family, but not President Mnangagwa. The Associated Press reported that no supporters had gathered along the procession route, but 500 mourners gathered in his birthplace in Vimba. On 13 September 2019, it was announced that the Mugabe family had accepted the Mnangagwa's government request to have Mugabe buried at Heroes Acre Cemetery and to have his burial be delayed for 30 days. The Mugabe family had initially rejected the government's burial plan and intended for him to be buried in Vimba on either 16 or 17 September, a day later than the government's proposal. On 14 September 2019, Mugabe's funeral, which was also open to public attendance, was held at the National Sports Stadium with an aerial photo showing the 60,000 capacity stadium to be about a quarter full. The funeral was attended by leaders of various African countries, including Mnangagwa, Dr. Kenneth Kaunda of Zambia, Olusegun Obasanjo of Nigeria, Ifepunye Pohamba, and Hage Geingob, both of Namibia, Joseph Kabila of the Democratic Republic of Congo, Uhuru Kenyatta of Kenya, and Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa, and many others. The burial took place on the 28th of September in a courtyard of his family home. There is the demise of a big man, I must tell you. Then, should we really talk about this now, or should we jump it? In 1939, as a fallout of World War II, the Union of South Africa became the first African country to declare war on Nazi Germany. Yes, we told you earlier that the World War started following Germany's invasion of Poland on the first day of September 1939. Well, but let's keep that now and look at some other issues. Yes. On the 6th of September in 1901, President of the United States of America, William McKinley, was shot and fatally wounded. He died 8 days later from his wounds. Leon Czolgosz, an unemployed anarchist, shot and fatally wounded President McKinley at the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, New York. McKinley eventually died on September 14 of gangrene caused by the wounds. McKinley was the incumbent and 25th President of the United States of America. He was shot on the grounds of the Pan American Exposition at the Temple of Music in Buffalo, New York, on September 6, 1901, 6 months into his second term in office. He was shaking hands with the public when Czolgosz shot him twice in the abdomen. At the time of the incident, he was the third American president to be assassinated, following Abraham Lincoln in 1865 and James Garfield in 1881. President McKinley enjoyed meeting the public and was reluctant to accept the security available to his office. Secretary to the President, George Kateyu, feared that an assassination attempt would take place during a visit to the Temple of Music and took it off the schedule twice, but McKinley restored it each time. Czolgosz had lost his job during the economic panic of 1893 and turned to anarchism a political philosophy adhered to by recent assassins of foreign leaders. He regarded McKinley as a symbol of oppression and was convinced that it was his duty as an anarchist to kill him. He was unable to get near the president during an earlier visit, but he shot him twice as McKinley reached to shake his hands in the reception line at the temple. One bullet grazed McKinley, the other entered his abdomen and was never found. McKinley initially appeared to be recovering, but it took a turn for the worse on September 13 as his wounds became gangrenous, and he died early the next morning. He was succeeded by his Vice President Theodore Roosevelt. Zolgors was sentenced to death in the electric chair, and Congress passed legislation to officially charge the Secret Service with the responsibility for protecting the president. Now living there, September 7th, 1996. September 7, 1996. On this very day, a highly successful American hip-hop artist and poet, Tupac Amaru Shakur, was shot and fatally wounded in a drive-by shooting and died from his injuries 6 days later at the University Medical Center in southern Nevada. The shooting occurred at 11:15 p.m. Pacific time when the car carrying Shakur and the owner of his label, the Dead Row Records, Marion Sugnite, was stopped at a red light at East Flamingo Road and Cover Lane. Shakur was struck by 4.40 caliber rounds fired from a Glock, 2 in the chest, 1 in the arm, and 1 in the thigh. He died from his injuries 6 days later at the University Medical Center in southern Nevada. Tupac Amaru Shakur was 25 years old. 1 year after the shooting, Sergeant Kevin Manning, who headed the investigation, told Los Angeles Sun investigative reporter Curtis Scott that Shakur's murder may never be solved. The case slowed early in the investigation. He said, a few new clues came in and witnesses climbed up. He stated the investigation was at a standstill. Idi Amin, a collaborator of Shakur and a member of Outlaws, said he was positive law enforcement knew what happened. Years later, Dwayne Kefidi Davis had confessed to former police investigator Chuck Phillips that his nephew Orlando Anderson, who was a member of a Compton gang known as the Southside Crips, was responsible for the shooting. In 2002, the Los Angeles Times published a 2-part story by Chuck Phillips titled Who Killed Tupac Shakur, based on a year-long investigation. Phillips reported that the shooting was carried out to avenge the beating of Anderson by Shakur a few hours earlier. The then 22-year-old Orlando Anderson, popularly known as Baby Lane himself, was fatally shot and killed in an unrelated gang violence in May of 1998 and could not be tried. Las Vegas police had considered Anderson a suspect at the beginning of the investigation into Tupac's murder in September of 1996 and interviewed him only once briefly. Phillips' article also implicated the owner of Bad Boy Records, Sean Puffy Combs, and a string of East Coast rappers, including Christopher Wallace, also known as the Notorious B.I.G., Tupac's biggest rival at the time, and several New York criminals. Less than 7 months later, B.I.G. himself was also killed in the drive-by shooting. Both murders have never been fully solved. Only recently, Dwayne Kefidi Davis came out. As a matter of fact, he was officially arrested by the police, and right now he's on trial for the shooting and death of Tupac Amaru Shakur of 1996. He had said Sean Puffy Combs promised to pay him $1 million if he could eliminate Tupac. But Puff Daddy has denied it because there is no evidence actually to incriminate him. What's going to happen? Well, that investigation is on. Who killed Tupac Amaru Shakur? And don't forget, we talked about the assassination of President John F. Kennedy on the 22nd of September. Okay, that was on the 22nd of November 1963 in Dallas, Texas. That is international politics. What led to his death? What happened? Some said his refusal to approve uh, a CIA false flag attack on Cuba. The CIA was attempting to overthrow the Cuban government led by Fidel Castro. Was one of the reasons why he was killed. We can't tell you that now. And the official report is that he was killed by Lee Harvey Oswald. There are a lot of conspiracy theories, but an average American historian will tell you today that Oswald was innocent. We'll look at the conspiracies and we'll come back to tell you so that you, on your own, you will look at it and conclude who really killed John F. Kennedy. We'll talk about that. But now let's come back to national issues. Let's look at the Buhari Babangida government between 1983 and 1993. 10 years in power, two men. One ruled for less than 2 years. The other one ruled for 8 years. Yes. But one notable aspect of Ibrahim Babangida's government is the Vatsa conspiracy of 1985. Late in 1985, a lot of army officers and civilians were arrested for conspiring to overthrow the government of Major General Ibrahim Babangida. And a special military tribunal was set up and several people were tried. 10 were sentenced to death. Others were sentenced to various levels of imprisonment. The 10 that were sentenced to die, they were shot and killed by firing squad on the 5th of March 1986 in Lagos. Babangida's best friend and Minister of the Federal Capital Territory, Major General Mamanje Avatsa, was among those killed. Others are Lieutenant Colonel Musa Bitiyong, Lieutenant Colonel Michael Yoshe, Lieutenant Colonel Christian Oche, Major Daniel Idowu Bamidele, Wing Commander Adamu Sakaba, Wing Commander Ben Ekele, Commodore A.A. Oguji, Squadron Leader Martins Olufoloronshaw Luther, and Squadron Leader A. Ahura. These officers were killed by firing squad. But there are a lot of conspiracy theories. Some say some are innocent, some are not innocent. Whether you like it or not, they planned a coup. And some agree that yes, a coup was planned. Well, there's going to be a talk for another day. Now let's look at the government of General Yakubu Gowon, the background, how he came to power. A lot of people have asked questions. There were other senior officers, like Adeyinka Adebayo, who was the colonel, and elder to Gowon. Why wasn't he chosen as the head of state? Some said there was Brigadier General Babafemi Ogundipe, the Chief of Staff Supreme Headquarters, following the murder of Major General Agoyin Ironsi, Nigeria's head of state in 1966. Then why a junior officer, a lieutenant colonel, was made the head of state? Well, it's not far-fetched, just because the northern troops wanted a Northerner as their leader, and they had dominated. It was a northern rebellion, it was a northern coup, and it was a success. The truth, the original truth, is that the northern troops planned this coup so they can secede from Nigeria. But since the success was overwhelming, they had to take advantage of the entire gains and took over the entire country. Most essays and books in Nigeria's military coups are focused on the aims and events during the January 15 coup of 1966. While much has been written and speculated about the coup, almost not much has been said about the counter coup that occurred 7 months later. The void of literary material on that second coup is one that I will attempt to fill. I believe that the coup, which started on the 9th of July 28, 1966, shaped Nigeria's political destiny like no other, and that Nigerians deserve to learn the truth regarding an event that has affected their lives till today. From articles, published interviews with eyewitnesses, and books over the last 3 decades, from the principal actors, I have managed to piece together an account of the most influential yet most mysterious coup in Nigerian regional premier Samadu Bello, who was at the time also the Sadaruna of Sokoto, and four most senior soldiers, Brigadier General Zakaria Mimalari, who was then the commandant of the 2nd Brigade headquarters in Lagos, Colonel Kor Mohammed, the Chief of Army Staff, Lieutenant Colonel Abago Lajema, the commanding officer of the 4th Infantry Battalion in Ibadan, and Lieutenant Colonel James Yakubu Palm, the Adjutant General Nigerian Army, by Igbo officers in January. Despite the murders of the humble Balewa and the Avunkula Bello, northern soldiers were more angry at the death of their respected senior colleagues whom they had looked up to. Their anger increased when Southerners jubilated when the news of the coup spread. The January coup. The truth is that not just Southerners jubilated. As a matter of fact, Northerners were more happy. They were happier that coup had to take shape, because the politicians at that point had already become very, very uncontrollable and very careless. They felt that the world was under their feet, so they could misbehave anyhow they liked. Nothing was going to happen. So the coup at the time, to every right-thinking Nigerian, was a necessity. But the way the coup was carried out, that was what Nigerians were not expecting. It became like a North and a South fight. And why can a coup take shape and you decide to kill my brother and you allow your brother to be alive? So that was what happened. And the entire situation was not able to be managed. And it snowballed into a retinue of very unforgettable and very dreaded events, particularly resulting to the outbreak of the Nigeria Civil War in 1967, which resulted to 30 months of blockade and loss of life of over 1.5 million persons. We'll talk about that. That's going to be a talk for another day. But for months, they were subjected to incessant pressure, talking about northern officers, to avenge the deaths of January by northern civilians, their wives, families, and junior officers. Additionally, there was a feeling that Igbos were getting too big for their boots. By mid-1966, there was an unwritten consensus among northern soldiers and politicians that there would be a July rematch with their Igbo colleagues. With their overwhelming numerical presence in the infantry, up to 75% of infantry riflemen were Northerners. It was clear that the revenge coup by northern soldiers would have drastic consequences. The mainly northern Ibadan-based 4th Battalion was particularly angry and hot after losing its current commanding officer, that is Lieutenant Colonel Abago Lajema, and the former one, Colonel Kor Mohammed. These are commanding officers during the January coup. During the January coup, Abago Lajema was commanding officer, but Kor Mohammed was commanding officer before then and handed over to Abago Lajema. The troops were not happy. Their heroes were gone. The anger increased when Igbo Deputy Commander Major Nzefili took command of the battalion following Lajema's death. The head of state, Major General Johnson Agoyin-Ronsi, was forced to replace Nzefili with a northern chief officer, the president of Major Joe Akahan, to placate them. Northern soldiers were not happy, and many openly voiced their intention to gain revenge for the killings of their northern brothers in arms in January. And leading this cause was a young Major Murtala Mohammed. Even after Murtala Mohammed was directly promoted to the rank of Lieutenant Colonel by the Commander-in-Chief himself, Mohammed refused to be placated. In an unguarded outburst in the presence of Igbo officers, the volatile and newly appointed Inspector of Signals referred to Ironsi as a fool. Yes, he said that. If you really want to read about this, you read the book, The Nigerian Revolution and the Biafran War by Major General Alexander Madiebo. You'll see the caption of that story. For fear of increasing tension in the country, the government had made no official announcement on the fate of the soldiers who had been killed in January. Thus, rumors and conspiracy theories about their whereabouts and miraculous manner of death and survival thrived. A riot almost broke out when an attempt was made to replace Brigadier Memalari's commanding officers and nameplates at the 2nd Brigade headquarters in Lagos. Rumors were so rife that many northern NCOs believed that Memalari had made a miraculous escape from the January majors and was still alive. These had a tiny semblance of truth. Memalari had managed to escape from the first attempt to arrest him by the commander of the Federal Guards Company before the coup in January. That's talking about Major Donatus Okafor. But as he was escaping on foot, he came across the car of his brigade major, Major Emmanuel Ifeajuna. Recognizing Ifeajuna, Memalari waved down the car and was promptly shot dead by Ifeajuna. That was treachery of the highest order, if you ask me. The de facto leader of the and coordinator of the North Revenge coup was the Inspector of Signals, Lieutenant Colonel Murtala Mohammed. Having finalized arrangements for their coup, northern officers twice proposed it because of had to postpone it because of last-minute changes and logistical problems. An opportunity arose when the head of state, Major General Ironsi, decided to undertake a nationwide tour. On the first leg of this tour, gunshots were heard while Ironsi was in Kaduna Airport. Nothing further than this occurred on the northern lap of Ironsi's tour, thanks largely to the personal intervention of the Emir of Kano. Northern traditional rulers and northern elders who cautioned against spilling Ironsi's blood on northern soil. Thus, northern soldiers decided to deal with Ironsi when he arrived in Ibadan, where a large contingent of northern soldiers was based, and which had an indifferent local population for the western leg of his nationwide tour. After addressing an assembly of western traditional rulers on July 28, Ironsi decided to spend the night in the Ibadan State House with the members of his entourage in an effort to prove that he was not heading an Igbo regime. Ironsi had, with great courage, entrusted his personal security to northern soldiers, including Major Yakubu Danjuma, Lieutenant William Walby, Titus Newman, and Sani Bello. One of his ADCs was a younger brother of Lieutenant Colonel James Yakubu Pam, who had been murdered during the January coup of 1966. By surrounding himself with northern soldiers, Ironsi sealed his own fate. Now let's look at Abeokuta, the catalyst. On July 28, the commanding officer of the Abeokuta garrison, Lieutenant Colonel Gabriel Okonweze, became concerned by reports he had received which indicated that another coup was imminent. Anxious to avoid a repeat of the killing that had occurred in January, Okonweze decided to call a meeting of and address officers at the garrison. Rather than calm tempers, the meeting further agitated junior northern troops, who assumed that the meeting was discussing plans to finish them off. While the meeting of officers was going on, Northern NCOs led by Sergeant Sabo Koli and Corporal Memari Maje burst into the officers' mess and shouted, "Hands up, gentlemen," before shooting Lieutenant Colonel Kowinze and the commander of the Reke Squadron in Abeokuta, Major John Obienu. Obienu had been billed to appear in the January Major School, but lost his nerve on the D-Day and failed to show up. It was believed that he was the one who had leaked the January coup to Major General Aguiyi Ironsi a day before the coup. And as compensation for his loyalty, Ironsi spared him and considered him for a juicy military post. Lieutenant Orok was also shot dead after driving into the mess and stumbling on the commotion occurring. Shortly afterwards, Captain Domkat Bali arrived at the mess and was shocked to discover the corpse of Lieutenant Orok. Lieutenant Roland Ogbonna telephoned Lagos to inform Army headquarters of the killings. Unfortunately, Ogbonna's call was connected to Lieutenant Nuhu Nathan, who, unknown to Ogbonna, was within the coup plot. Ogbonna's call merely served as a rallying call for other northern troops who up till now were unaware that the coup had begun to mobilize. In Lagos, Lieutenant Nathan and MM Nasarawa alerted the coup leaders, Lieutenant Colonel Morotala Mohammed and Major Martins Adamu. Lieutenant Pam Wadcon telephoned the adjutant of the Ibadan battalion, Lieutenant Garba Duba, and informed him of the killings at Abeokuta. Wadcon advised Duba, who later rose to the rank of Major General and became a prominent member of the Babangida's administration, to commence the coup in Ibadan. Now in control of Abeokuta garrison, northern soldiers then conducted a door-to-door search of the garrison for Igbo soldiers. When found, Igbo soldiers were shot and their bodies dumped into a vehicle parked near one of the officers' quarters. A full account of events in Abeokuta and interviews with some of the principal actors, such as Colonel D.S. Abubakar, Abdullah Ishele, and T.Y. Danjuma, is given in the Nigerian Army's History of the Civil War, entitled History and Reminiscence, edited by Hafiz Momo. Now let's look at happenings in Ibadan. In Ibadan, troops under the command of Major T.Y. Danjuma, whom Ironsi had recently promoted, surrounded the State House, where Ironsi, the military governor of the Western region, Lieutenant Colonel Francis Adekule Fajuyi, and 2nd Brigade Commander, Lieutenant Colonel Hilary Njoku, were located. Danjuma received a telephone call from Lieutenant Colonel Gowon in Lagos and informed the latter of his plan to capture Ironsi. Gowon asked Danjuma, "Can you do it?" You can see this in the book, Danjuma, The Making of a General. And Gowon cautioned that Danjuma to make sure there was no bloodshed. Take that. Gowon said to Danjuma, make sure there was no bloodshed. Today, Biafran propaganda claims that Gowon was part and parcel of the coup. That is not entirely accurate. Whereas Gowon doubtless knew about the counter coup, and he knew that the coup was on the way, but he was not physically involved in it. By this time, Ironsi had already been informed that the counter coup was underway and that he was the next target. Unaware that they were surrounded by co-conspirators, Ironsi and Fajuyi sent out various aides from the State House to appraise what was going on outside. Being privy to the plot, these men did not alert Fajuyi and Ironsi of the dangers they were in. Fajuyi's ADC, Lieutenant Umar, went out, conferred with Danjuma's troops, and returned to falsely inform Ironsi and Fajuyi that all was well. Meanwhile, all was never well. Next to venture outside was Lieutenant Colonel Hilary Njoku, Njoku was recognized by northern troops outside the state house and they opened fire on him. Njoku managed to escape with a thigh injury. Eventually, Danjuma and his troops gained access to the state house from where they abducted Ironsi and his Air Force ADC Captain Andrew Nwankwo. Also kidnapped were Lieutenant Colonel Adekunle Fajui and another member of Ironsi's entourage, Lieutenant Sani Bello. The four men were led out with their hands tied behind their backs. The captives were stripped naked and beaten by their captors. Ironsi and Fajui took the brunt of the beatings. As the beatings continued, the captors interrogated Ironsi about his knowledge of the January coup and the whereabouts of the men who had been killed in January. After denying any involvement in the January coup, Ironsi switched off and endured the blows that were being rained down on him. The captives were loaded into a Land Rover and driven off in a convoy that included two other vehicles. Major Danjuma did not accompany the convoy, but instead departed for Lagos. Present in the convoy were Lieutenant William Walby, Garba Duba, Titus Newman, Abdullah Sheleng, Warrant Officer I. Baka, Sergeant Tijani, and Regimental Sergeant Major Husseini Fage. Ironsi and Fajui were so badly beaten and wounded that they could hardly stand. They were led out into the bush where they were killed by a few rounds of machine gun fire. Captain Nwankwo managed to escape as his captors' attention was focused on Ironsi and Fajui. It is from he and Lieutenant Bello that the most reliable eyewitness account of Ironsi and Fajui's last hours emerged. You can go and get this book, Ironside. Get that book and read it. Ironside was written by Chuks Iliobuna, and he interviewed some of these people who gave their eyewitnesses accounts. Ironsi and Fajui's death were not officially announced for 6 months, and during the tense days of August 1966, the military governor of Eastern Region, Lieutenant Colonel Odumego Ojukwu, repeatedly asked Gowon, where is the Supreme Commander? Well, this is how much we can take for today. This is how much we really want to take. Next time, we'll tell you about, when we are doing the recap next week, we'll tell you about the Lagos operation of the July 29, 1966 military rebellion. We'll tell you about the Kaduna operation. We'll tell you about the Enugu operation. And we'll look at the distress of the distress of the second in command to General Agoyin Ronsi, that is the chairman of the Supreme, should I say the vice chairman of the Supreme Military Council, Brigadier General Babafemi Ogundipe. His trivials. We'll tell you all about that, and we'll now look at the consequences of the July 29 mutiny. Collapse of discipline. Yes, in 1966. How northern soldiers went on rampage. The killing was just too much. That's why youthful exuberance is not a good thing, because a lot of the northern officers regretted their actions because they were young men. Some of them, didn't even know what was happening, but some of them killed their friends and they regretted it. But thank God that at the end of this whole thing, Nigeria became one again. There was the outbreak of the Nigeria Civil War in 1967. Some people termed it the Brothers' War, Nigeria and Biafra. But in 1970, 15th of January 1970, the war came to an end. Well, this is how much you can take. Always ensure that you are part of this. History in perspective, issues in perspective. It's historical perspective of the past. It's current affair, basically current affairs And it's something that we really need to constantly rub our minds together to discuss. We need to discuss our past regularly, and then we'll see how our future will be like. My name is Mbum Ferdinand. This is a production of History Desk TV, and we have come to stay. And I believe that we'll do these things together regularly. Thank you.
Okay.